Good evening. This is Joe Leibner doing my case study for Mod 5 for AEP 855 Educational Leadership. Okay, so the facts of the case or the circumstance of events was that David was given a set of brass knuckles by James. When they passed each other in the hallway, James was called down to the office to deal with some tardies, and he came into contact with David. A teacher observed this and didn't see what was passed, but did see the exchange. So while James was on his way down, I called in the police officer to have David escorted. During the time in the office, David was searched, at which point the brass knuckles were found. James was honest and said that they were his and that he had threatened David to hold on to them when he came down to the office. The police officer arrested both of them because this is a felony account of having a prohibited weapon on school property. I was a little taken aback by this, that David was under arrest also. The school board policy suggests that they both, or requires rather, that they both go to 45 days of the DAEP suspension program. That's the district's disciplinary alternative education program. So once the boys left, I called both mothers, explained the situation. James's mother responded supportively of the actions taken and was hopeful that this would help James's behavior in the future. David's mother came in and was visibly upset and pretty frustrated with the events, as she viewed her son as the victim. I did not fill out the paperwork for David to go to the program, and so David returned to class. A week later, I was contacted by the director of secondary education, who told me that I needed to comply, although he understood my position. And if I chose not to comply, I would receive an official reprimand in my personal file. Okay, some legal or ethical issues with this. Legal issues. Number one, James did threaten David. That took place. James and David both possessed a prohibited weapon on school property, and failure to follow through with one of the punishments could look like a discrimination, so might open ourselves to litigation that way. From an ethical standpoint, the policy dictates that both students go through the 45-day suspension program, and I did not submit this paperwork for David, so I showed preferential treatment to one of the boys. I called the police officer in an attempt to intimidate the students, and again, I decided that James was more deserving of the punishment. The synthesis section, this was very simple for me. I and David are both, or David and I rather, excuse me, are both victims of James's behavior and the school board policy, both of them factoring in, and they are mutually exclusive in this circumstance. Okay, some of the facts. The known people were listed in the thing. You can see there on the list. The only thing that was mentioned beyond description and names, or relationship and names, was that James and his mother are from the south side of town, and so they have experienced a little bit of a different experience here and there. Unknown people are James's target after school. He mentioned during the questioning that he was going to use the brass knuckles for his own purposes later, and other students that are observing these outcomes. How will this, the result of my decision, affect them? The place that this took, that all these events happened, were the school hall, my office, and the suspension area. The unknowns in that regard are James's after school location. Where was that going to take place? Was that going to take place on school grounds? This is a high school. There were fine arts mentioned, but not necessarily immediately applicable. This is a public high school, and the unknown for this is, do either of these students have other educational needs, IEPs and or 504s? So review and prioritization of the information. The stakeholders involved are much more reaching than it initially appears. The entire student body, how do they view and react to the way that I choose to enforce this? The two students and their families have the largest immediate stake, as well as myself, but theirs is certainly superseding mine. And the school board and others in the upper administration have not yet been consulted. That's okay. The one director had been. The principals are at liberty to run the school, generally speaking. I do have enough knowledge to act in this circumstance, but I do need to make sure that I pursue a more appropriate course of action in the future. Not more appropriate as in less problematic, but more appropriate as in can we find something that is better suited to fit the needs of everyone? Options and consequences. Because of my beliefs and leadership philosophy, they are very straightforward. There are really only two that I will consider. I will continue without filling out the paperwork for David's suspension, or I will fill it out. If I choose not to, I will receive an official reprimand, and the students may believe the rules no longer apply. And if I do fill it out, then David's family is frustrated and could seek legal assistance, and David's future options become more limited. He is not without options, but it does change them. Evaluating my options. So my philosophy will allows me to weigh appropriately. Not all things are the same. Okay. So just because we have 2 things in one column and 3 in another doesn't mean it's 3-2. That's the decision. Some things are more important. The student's welfare is more important than my own, for example. So in option 1, the pros, David was a victim every step of the way, and he does not deserve punishment. And I believe in integrity and honesty more than policy. Some of the cons, it may hurt me professionally. Other students may react unfavorably through their behavior in the future, and James's family may feel discriminated against. Option 2, I will not receive the reprimand, and I will maintain loyalty to my school's policy. And I also listed that under a con, because maintaining loyalty to my school's policy can be a good thing, but when it supersedes my responsibility to my students, I think that it is not a positive. David's future becomes more limited, as I mentioned again. And finally, how would I want my child to be treated in each of these situations? And I listed that here because I would not want them to be treated as option 2 would suggest. Okay, section 8, choose the best option. Because of my leadership philosophy, I have to choose number 1. I will let David return to class, and I will take the letter in my file. A piece of paper is not more important than the welfare and the future of this young man, under any circumstances, in my opinion. After this, after an appropriate time and through the appropriate channels, we can seek betterment of school board policy. Make sure other students don't fall into the same little concern here. From a reflection standpoint, I was hired to look after the best interest of the school and all of its stakeholders. In these circumstances, all of the stakeholders are, their needs are being met, and their best opportunity for success is being met by selecting option 1 and not filling out David's paperwork, but allowing James to enjoy the fruits of his labor, if you will. Following policy at the expense of common sense or consideration would not be appropriate. David has the right, and he deserves a safe environment, and that was not afforded to him throughout the entire thing. The reason that I mentioned earlier that I was a victim of policy is because the policy is putting me in a position to choose rather than to select the best course of action for the students, which is why I was hired to begin with. So you'll notice the last piece that I highlighted there. My profession cannot be more important than the betterment of my students and the school. I have been put into a position of leadership as the principal, and failure to lead as the person that they hired would be more egregious than going with the policy at any cost. And you can see how I finished this. This ties it all together very well for me. I know that this is a school project and this is a public school, but I cannot separate myself from my faith. And this guides the majority of my philosophy, beliefs, and decision-making. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. The New King James Version of the Bible, and that's from James 4:17. So that's the option that I will select. And thank you for listening, and have a good evening.